Mike?
Can I come up here?
Sure.
All right. Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, sir.
It's nice to speak in front of have a microphone because I've spoke at other meetings and I've had a couple of people come up to me and say, I really enjoyed your program. I just wish I could have heard it. So I'm trying to take care of that tonight. First, I want to thank Mr. Yancey for your war service, sir. Thank you. And I want to acknowledge your camp. You're very generous camp. You know, giving to the projects that you do. And I appreciate you all being here because it's hard to compete with a Trump rally. And I know you've given that up to make it tonight, and I appreciate that. And I thank Commander Richard Brewer and Matthew and Chris who have worked behind the scenes to bring me here. My program, well, okay, let me start from the beginning. It's good to be here tonight to present my program, the Camel Regiment, at this great Alamo Guards SCV camp. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss my book because, let's face it, if the Oprah still had her best book list, my Camel Regiment's not going to be on it, okay? Not going to make Oprah's list. Over 2.5 decades ago, while researching my family history, I discovered that my paternal great-great-grandfather, John K. Bell, was a Confederate soldier. His service records show that he was a good soldier. The more I learned out about his service during the war, the more interested I became in his regiment, the 43rd Mississippi. It was soon apparent that the 43rd, one of Mississippi's finest regiments, was poorly documented, even within the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. There was not a book or a detailed source describing the regiment's exploits and history. The men of the 43rd deserve to be remembered and not forgotten. Writing a book has always been on my bucket list. It occurred to me then that this was it. I would research and write a book about the 43rd. At the 2018 Mississippi SCV reunion, I was presented with the prestigious SCV Colonel C.E. Hooker Publication Award, Best Civil War History in Mississippi, for my book, The Camel Regiment. It is very pleasing to have your work recognized by your peers, but it is the men of the 43rd Mississippi who truly deserve that award. I just had to keep it focused and let the soldiers tell their story. After all, they were there, they lived it. John K. Bell, my great-great-grandfather, enlisted at Mooreville, Mississippi into the Itawamba Tigers, commanded by Captain Merriman Pound in April of 1862. He was 24 years old, married with children, and worked with his father on the family farm. The Itawamba Tigers became Company H of the 43rd Mississippi at the formation of the regiment the next month. Bell, promoted to first corporal, is listed among the men of the 43rd surrendered with the Army of Tennessee in North Carolina at war's end in 1865. 3 years after the war, he left Mississippi and moved his family to Montgomery County, Texas. Since Mississippi was in a large part devastated during the war, many of its Confederate veterans moved to Texas for greener pastures. He died in 1879 at the young age of 43 from consumption, which today is known as tuberculosis. I do not have a diary, personal letters, or even an image of him. I know he died in Montgomery County, but I do not know where he is buried. He was typical of Johnny Red. Honorable, steadfast, faithful, unheralded. Recruited from the counties of northeast Mississippi, at least throughout Vicksburg. The regiment received its nickname from its unmistakable mascot, a privately imported African dromedary one-humped camel named Old Douglas. Old Douglas was not a refugee from the U.S. Camel Corps that was stationed at Camp Verde. Camp Verde is 52 miles northwest of San Antonio. The U.S. Camel Corps was an Army experiment to test the use of camels, or these ships of the desert, as pack animals in the arid deserts and mountain peaks of the Southwest. Jefferson Davis, when he was U.S. Secretary of War, had recommended the use of camels for military operations. The camel experiment met with mixed results, depending on who you talk to. During the same time, the South underwent a camel craze, privately importing the animals through Mobile, Alabama, to be tested by planters to find out if they could be domesticated. Southern newspapers of the era printed many accounts of this. At the outbreak of the war, the Yankees abandoned Camp Verde and left the camels behind to fend for themselves. When the Confederates took over, they also found the camels were difficult to work with. Although it was reported that some were used to haul salt to the coast and cotton to Mexico. The U.S. Army had some camels that had made the trek to the far west and were used by the Union Army for survey work. The 43rd was the only regiment, Federal or Confederate, east of the Mississippi River to use a camel militarily. I had a couple of questions about where Camp Verde was. It's officially it's 63 miles. It's in Kerr County. If you take 110, you turn on 173, you will come to the historic Camp Verde. And what's there now? Has anybody been there before? Okay. What's there now is a store, a place to eat, and then there's a historical marker, and that's Camp Verde. Old Douglas is not part of that, but that's the U.S. Camel Corps. Now, Old Douglas was given by Lieutenant William Hargrove, whose family owned the Trinity Plantation in east central Mississippi, to its founding commander, Colonel William H. Moore. Now, Old Douglas was not a war horse. He was used to carry the colonel's gear. Moore later gave the camel to the regiment band to carry its instruments and knapsacks. Old Douglas was a celebrity in his day. Not only was he popular with the 43rd, but throughout the Confederate Army. Even the Federals were well aware of the rebel camel. The 43rd found out, as the U.S. Camel Corps had done before them, that camels and horses and mules do not mix. On the road to the Battle of Iuka, September of 1862, the handler of Old Douglas had been instructed to keep him in the rear and out of the way of the army. Just before dark, the regiment, the 43rd, moved into a field that the camel was in the line of travel. Amid the confusion, we saw men take to the trees. A horse belonging to the regimental adjutant broke loose from the fence it was tied to and charged, with the fence rail still attached to its halter, through the regiment that killed the soldier. The veterans of the 43rd never forgot that wild stampede. I got a horseman here. You ever mix a camel with the horses? Okay. Be careful. Now, near the end of the siege of Vicksburg, Old Douglas, while grazing behind the lines, believed to be out of harm's way, was shot down by a squad of Yankee sharpshooters. The rebels quickly took revenge and dropped the federal officer in command. There were accounts that Old Douglas served as camel steaks to the starving rebels and was given a full military burial. Afterwards, the Yankees carved the skeleton of Old Douglas into rings and sold them as souvenirs. After his bones were gone, the Yankees substituted cattle bones and claimed they belonged to the famous Confederate camel. Old Douglas has been given recognition and a headstone in the memorial plot dedicated to the 43rd Mississippi at Cedar Hill Cemetery, located near Soldiers Rest in Vicksburg. The Old Douglas headstone has become one of Vicksburg's most popular and photographed attractions. The city of Vicksburg once even considered Old Douglas for their official logo. They use a key now. There is a lot of inside baseball connected with the acquisition of the camel's headstone and memorial plot. But I can assure you that the research and dedication of myself, and especially my co-historian, Jim Huffman of Picayune, Mississippi, led to this. W. Cook, a veteran of the 43rd Mississippi, wrote, "Douglas was a faithful, patient animal, and his service merits record." The 43rd was a large regiment composed of 11 companies instead of the usual 10. The regiment was fortunate to be led by excellent field and company officers. On the most part, these officers were well educated and from prominent and wealthy families in their communities. There were slaveholders, but 3/4 of the men were poor dirt farmers trying to scratch out a living. At the Battle of Corinth in October 1862, Colonel Moore of the 43rd led the Confederate charge that broke the Union line. The rebels came on in hand-to-hand fighting, house to house, and through the streets into the rail crossroads near the landmark 2-story Tishomingo Hotel, a well-known landmark but later burned down. It was here that Colonel Moore was shot off his horse and mortally wounded. This was a Confederate high tide of the battle. The original painting, Decisions at the Crossroads, which hangs in the Civil War Interpretation Center in Corinth, is based on this legendary charge. I own a print and is proudly displayed in my home. In their first real test of combat, or to see the elephant, as it was referred to back then, a Missouri veteran recalled that the 43rd was marked by bravery, the most daring and devoted. Even though the 43rd lost its colonel and lieutenant colonel, Richard Lee, in the battle, they would be replaced by other outstanding officers, Colonel Richard Harrison and Lieutenant Colonel Columbus Lum Sykes. Harrison moved shortly after the war to Waco, joining his two brothers, Confederate Generals James and Thomas Harrison. His older brothers had moved to Waco before the war. Richard practiced medicine and became a prominent man in the community during the dark days of Reconstruction. He served as a trustee at Waco University, a forebearer to Baylor. Richard had a twin brother, Isom, who served as colonel of the 6th Mississippi Cavalry before he was killed in the 1864 Battle of Tupelo. Another brother, Dr. Moses Harrison, served as a Confederate surgeon. The Harrison family contributed 2 generals, 2 colonels, and a doctor to the Confederacy. There is a wooden box which includes chemicals that belonged to Dr. Richard Harrison on display in the Earl Harrison House in Waco. In regard to the regiment's nickname, the Bloody 43rd, or Sober Key, Lieutenant Colonel Columbus Sykes referred to the regiment as the Bloody 43rd. Sykes' uniform and other possessions are on display at the Kennesaw Battlefield Museum in Georgia. Has anybody been there before? Well, if you go in there, his coat and his trunk and some other items are on display, and that's Lieutenant Columbus Sykes of the 43rd. I have an image of the Decision of the Crossroads painting to pass around. This resolution doesn't do this glorious painting justice, so I made a copy in black and white. You may not be able to tell, but Colonel Moore is on horseback with a Van Dorn flag of a crescent moon and stars carried by the Confederates at this battle. On the back is an image of the Old Douglas headstone. Coins have been placed on top as a sign of respect and upkeep. Has everybody seen this famous stone? Okay. It's all over the internet, and if you go to Vicksburg, it's there. I'll pass this around and collect them afterwards. This will be the Corinth battle I was telling you about. And this is a black and white image of this painting. It's the official, what's known as the official painting of the Battle of Corinth. That's Colonel Moore of the 43rd. That's mounted. The 43rd had a formidable role at the siege of Vicksburg. The regiment was assigned to General Hebert's Louisiana and Mississippi Brigade, which defended the 3rd Louisiana Redan. This fort stood at the Jackson Road, which was the main artery into Vicksburg, and Vicksburg was a key to slice the Confederacy in half at the Mississippi River. Most of the great Vicksburg lore happened at or near the 3rd Louisiana Redan. While there was hard fighting along the lines, most of the main federal efforts to breach the Confederate lines happened at the 3rd Louisiana Redan. To protect their men moving forward, the Yankees pushed ahead a flatbed railroad car protected with cotton bales. The rebels countered by ramming turpentine, soaked cotton tow wads into the hollow opening of their mini balls, and shot them into the cotton bales, which then caught fire and burnt down the railroad rail car. Hence the term flaming bullets. However, the Yankees then soaked with water wicker casings of cane and cotton and pushed them forward as protection from the flaming bullets. The two famous mine explosions of the siege, detonated by tons of black powder, were dug under the 3rd Louisiana Redan. In the first explosion, 6 men belonging to the 43rd were countermining at the time, and they were blown up along with the top of the fort that created a huge crater. The Yankees charged in but were driven back. Coonskin Tower, named after the federal officer in charge who wore a coonskin hat, was built upon railroad iron and cross ties and overlooked the rebel lines. Many Rebs were shot down until they learned to duck from the sniper fire of Coonskin Tower. Even the surrender between Union Generals Grant and Pemberton of the Vicksburg garrison happened there on July 4th, of old days, right? At the end of the 47-day siege, the rebels were described as weak and gaunt skeletons, but still proud and dedicated to their cause. Afterwards, the city of Vicksburg did not celebrate Independence Day until the end of World War II. No fireworks, picnics, or days off in Vicksburg for 81 years. Brought a couple of props. Just to give you a visual idea, when I explained the flaming bullets, on the mini balls, there is a hollow. It's hollow here. So what the Rebs would do is they would soak these in turpentine. They would ram them into the mini ball, okay? Then they would ram that down the barrel. So when it would shoot out, the spark would ignite this bullet. They'd shoot it into the cotton bales, it would burn the cotton bales down. That's when the Yankees finally figured out that they could soak the cotton bales, they could keep coming forward as protection, and they moved ever closer upon the Vicksburg garrison. Also, what one of the guys wrote about was you could stick, they would either a ramrod, maybe a bayonet, or a stick, just for laughs. They would put their hat above the line, and by the time they would bring the hat down, it'd be full of be full of bullets. So it would be something like this, right? And by the time they could bring it back down, it'd be full of shots. That's how much firepower was going on, how much the sharpshooters were acting on both sides. Now, there were close to 30,000 Confederate soldiers surrendered and paroled at Vicksburg. The 43rd was the second largest regiment at Vicksburg with 531 men and missed being tied by just one man. I remember I told you they were a large regiment. And that was with one company that was not present. Grant was adamant that every Confederate soldier receive a parole. Under a cartel between both armies, if a soldier took up arms while under parole and not declared exchanged, he could be executed and captured. My great-great-grandfather, Bell, service records showed that he was present for duty, but nowhere was his parole at Vicksburg to be found. Why not? Vicksburg paroles were included in the records of his fellow comrades. It was difficult to believe that my great-great-grandfather was able to slip out of Vicksburg without a parole. Further research showed that Company H, his company, commanded by Captain Merriman Pound, was on detached duty and cut off from Vicksburg and could not rejoin the 43rd. Company H, combined with a few other men from different commands, became Pound's Battalion, Mississippi Sharpshooters. They were assigned to Hector's Texas Brigade and fought with the Texans at Jackson and Chickamauga. I can say my great-great-grandfather fought with the Texans. This is a great source of pride for me. Pound's Mississippi Sharpshooters would rejoin the Bloody 43rd after the Battle of Chickamauga, which was in September of 1863. Now, not only is this book a war story, it is as much a human interest story. The important role of the black population involved with the 43rd is discussed. The letters and diaries of the soldiers of the regiment reveal the faithfulness and loyalty of their black servants. These men attended to indispensable camp duties, such as the setup and breakdown of tents. They served as cooks and they laundered. They rode back and forth from the camps to the plantations and farms, entrusted with and carrying supplies such as mail, clothing, medicines, and other valuable items. All the while, they were so close to the enemy they could have turned their horse to join the Yankees. There is a newspaper account of how the servants of the 43rd recovered lost mail from a creek and returned it to the Army. After the surrender of Vicksburg, the Federals offered to let all servants within the garrison leave with their masters and the Confederate Army as long as it was voluntary. So many servants left, the Federals became embarrassed and rescinded their own policy. Two servants of the 43rd misled the Yankees into believing they had been mistreated. They soon confiscated some choice mules and rode off to rejoin the regiment after the surrender. Servants traveled by train back and forth from Mississippi to Atlanta, carrying personal items to the regiment. After the war, servants were eligible for Confederate pensions. Lieutenant Robert Adcock, 43rd Mississippi, witnessed the pension application of Sergeant Eli Lampley. Eli served in the captain's mess and was always present with the 43rd until the final Carolinas campaign when he was at Home Mill. Adcock of the 43rd would not swear under oath the service of Eli Lampley if he did not deserve a Confederate pension. Now, Joshua Steele, only 16 years old, held horses at Shiloh for the Confederate Army. Later, he served in the 43rd as a sharpshooter and was posted in a tree alongside a black sharpshooter for the South. A Snake and a Federal cavalry patrol arrived at the same time. Sharpshooters, being despised, could be executed on sight if captured. Both men chose to remain silent as a poisonous viper crawled over them before the Yankees rode off. The Bloody 43rd did not stop fighting after Vicksburg. The regiment fought in 14 battles, including most of the major ones in Mississippi. Members of the regiment were briefly mounted on the field in Roadwood Forest at the Battle of Oklahoma. They endured the 100 days under fire of the Atlanta campaign. They made the horrific charge at Franklin and were steadfast during the disastrous Battle of Nashville. Near the end, when all knew that the war was lost, the 43rd, with what was left of the Army of Tennessee, boarded the rickety and dangerous trains to North Carolina to stand and bloody the nose of Sherman's destructive Federal Army. Sherman drove through the South, as you know, on his march to the sea. He did well until he stood before troops, and then he didn't move so fast. At the Battle of Bentonville, the tattered and depleted but still proud Army of Tennessee shouted their legendary, hair-raising, blood-curdling rebel yell, attacked and routed the Yankees in what was to be their last hurrah. For the men who wore the gray, the war would end shortly afterwards. They accepted the outcome, but did not surrender their honor, nor did their opponents in blue expect this. The brave honor the brave. The Southerners walked back to what was left of their homes and rebuilt their lives and communities. Time does not allow for me to tell you about all the amazing stories of the regiment. That's what the book is for. This is an opportunity to step back in time and take a journey, a Civil War experience with the Bloody 43rd. I have visited every battlefield the 43rd fought at, and now so can you. I have read the Camel Regiment several times, and each time it gets better. One of these times, the South's going to win the war.
There you go.
That's how good it gets.
Ow!
Now, old books about the Civil War are enjoyable, but it's the regimentals, the memoirs, which become the most sought after. For those on social media, check out my Facebook page, the Camel Regiment, 43rd Mississippi. You can take a picture of it up there, or just remember the title of the book. I have a lot of great postings on there. Send me in stuff, historical things. Check it out. Like, follow, and share if you will. Now, most Civil War authors, such as myself, don't spend many years of research and expenses involved for monetary gain. However, it is important to support an author's work as much as possible if the true history of the Civil War, war between the states, War for Southern Independence, and the Confederacy and its soldiers are still to be told. Now, tonight I can offer you a signed edition for $25. That's 20% off the regular publisher's price of $30. If you're interested, I'll be over here. And I thank you for your time and interest and support. Is there any question, any Camel questions, you think? Sir?
Are there any pictures of the camel in existence?
No. There is no pictures of Old Douglas, and there's just one picture that is known to exist of the whole of the U.S. Camel Corps, separate from Old Douglas. There's like one picture, it's out in California, and it's a two-hump camel. And there's one picture that's taken like in 1879. And that, you can go on the internet.
There was one published in Military Images some years ago, but I think it was earlier than 1879.
1879.
The one I'm thinking of.
Okay, I'm not aware of that then.
Yeah.
That'd be one, but I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
Did you say that's only $25?
Hard copy.
How can you do that?
Mm-hmm.
What a great price. Get over there, I want to buy one.
It's not, I don't do this for the money, obviously. But it is, if you'd like one, you have it. It's a great read. Anyway, I thank you all. Pleasure to be here. I'm a member of a camp in Jacksonville, where the General Hogg camp, and y'all seem like a really great camp. You're very generous. It's been a pleasure, and I thank you.
Thanks for coming.